Good afternoon. Today I'm going to interview Penelope Ryder, who is writing and making YouTube videos about PTSD, among other things. And so I wanted to talk with her about that because we don't have any human beings that aren't broken. We're all broken in some way.
I agree.
And today I'm going to interview Penelope Ryder about PTSD and how she is dealing with it, and we can have a little chat about my very minor bit of PTSD, and then we'll see where it goes.
Okay.
So Penelope, welcome. And because this is a Carl Jung Depth Psychology YouTube channel, I'd like very much to hear how you got exposed first to Carl Jung and his work.
Okay. Okay. So in 2011, I found a gentleman called Dr. David Hawkins,
Uh-huh.
and his work. I was trying to heal myself from wounds from childhood, and through that, I got into spirituality and looking at Dr. David Hawkins' work, a book called Power versus Force. And the reason I came across that book was based on that I was using a pendulum or looking at kinesiology. And I was using a pendulum, which you can, I don't know if you know what I mean by a pendulum, Skip. It's,
Uh, well, I know what a pendulum is,
yeah.
but I don't know about
So
it for divination or
okay,
anything.
so it's dowsing. Instead of using the rods, which people can dowse with, I
Hmm.
was using a pendulum stroke
Oh,
with.
I see. Okay, yeah, I've seen that kind of dowsing. Yes.
So I was asking questions, but the book I bought for that reason, because of the pendulum, it mentioned kinesiology. And from that book, I noticed that Carl Jung's name kept coming up a lot in the
Hmm.
chapters he was
Right.
being referred to. For years, I went on to continuing with those books, but eventually I found that spirituality was not really healing me, and that I dug deeper. And I will add that I had a bit of a mini breakdown in 2016 after completing a book called A Course in Miracles. Again, I
Mm.
was trying to surrender, which I didn't know at the time, complex PTSD. I was trying to forgive and doing it through forgiveness or surrendering to a higher power.
Okay, so two questions. Let's define what you mean by a mini breakdown, and let me emphasize that I'm not a mental health professional,
Okay,
and so we're having a conversation based on my life experience and your life experience.
exactly. I'm not a
Oh,
health professional either. So,
okay. All right. So let's define what you mean when you say I had a mini breakdown,
okay.
and define what you mean by healing. Okay.
Okay. So the breakdown was I was trying to heal my mind of trauma, and I was being told that the way to heal it was through forgiveness, that I had to forgive anything that had occurred in my life. And also in spirituality, there was a belief, a lot of my friends in spirituality were telling me that the trauma that happened to me in childhood, which was abuse, I was told that that was my karma and that I created that and chose it.
Oh my God.
So as
What a terrible thing to tell a child.
and so I had 13 years of quite heavy-handed abuse by my parents, and as a result of that, it led to not being heard by the people that I was integrating with on social media in groups.
Hmm.
And I was not being heard. I was told that my problem was that I had to forgive. I didn't understand at that point that I had complex PTSD issues, that
Hmm.
flashbacks, nightmares, and not being triggered, and then feeling anger or feeling rageful, not being rageful to people, but feeling volcanic inside, and having fight flight, meaning being very busy, and not being able to focus,
Hmm.
and
Keeping
and
yourself busy is a way of not thinking about it. Is that what
yeah,
you mean?
and but prior to, I will skip skip. I'll go back one moment. On the 2011, I was trying to stop drinking alcohol. I was using alcohol as self-medicating.
Mm-hmm.
So I was drinking a bottle a night of Sancerre expensive wine, £20 a bottle, would you believe?
Wow.
Every night. It was my addiction. So I had a business. I'd come home from work, and I'd sit there and drink my wine. And then I would reminisce on my history, and then I would do things like call the Samaritan, saying I didn't want to be here, but I didn't want to not be here. But I didn't know how to forgive, and it was very messy in my head. Mm-hmm. And eventually, I stopped drinking in 2012, and that was due to reading some deeper work of Dr. David Hawkins called Healing and Recovery. And again, Jung's name kept coming up in his work. So eventually then I turned to astrology to understand what was going on in my life, and that was a very healing tool for me, something called Evolutionary Astrology. And again, in Jeff Wolfe Green, who came up with Evolutionary Astrology, which is about the trajectory of the soul, again, he mentions Jung's work. So this led to about 2 years ago, I started reading Jung. And one of the things that got me, which I didn't understand at the time, was the quote, which really helped me, which is, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate.
Right.
So I was having many experiences where things kept happening to me, the same failed relationships, the same unhappidness, being a loner, not feeling at peace, and feeling a lot of feelings that I didn't understand the truth of what was going on. But then I came across a gentleman called Pete Walker, who wrote a book, Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. And I felt, that was 2 years ago, I felt that somebody actually got me. For the first time, I realized what was going on. So I wouldn't label myself. I think this is very important for me, that I wouldn't call complex PTSD a disorder. I would say it is a response to events that have happened to you in your life, and that for that reason, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with somebody who has it. It's not a disorder, it's something that we react to. So the only way through it is understanding what the triggers are and start to heal the areas in life which are triggering or causing flashbacks, or knowing how to handle flashbacks.
Right.
So I can go on.
Okay, I very much agree with you that PTSD is, well, as you said it, I think you said it better than I did.
I think it's being bypassed, and I think a lot of people are being labelled with conditions that they don't have. So right. I think,
we're getting a lot of drugs pushed based on something
yes.
like PTSD.
Yes.
Okay, so tell me more, though, about what happened with your Jungian work. That it was more than one quote, though.
It was more than one quote. So through the archetypes, through learning evolutionary astrology, you're introduced to archetypes. So we're looking at the archetypes of the planets and the houses. It's quite in depth in that astrology is, I would say, it's like reading a piece of music. Every piece of music is different. So every human being born at a particular time, date, and place, the planets fall in the sky at a particular point. It's like a snapshot of your time of birth. Right. And then from there, we have transits. So the moon keeps moving. It takes 28 and a half days to go around a chart. And the sun keeps moving. And then the outer planets, the archetypes of Pluto and Neptune. I will add that when I got this book,
I am.
I was the beauty in there of talking about the fish, because in astrology, Pisces, the archetype and the ruler, Neptune, the fish and the consciousness, it relates back to Jung and his work on the fish. So it all came together for me, the depths of the subconscious, what's unseen, and the place that Pisces and Neptune hold in a chart will be the 12th house. So it's the accumulation of the totality of all that we are. And I don't know if the word dissemination is the right word. I might get that wrong there, but it's the accumulation of the totality. So the unconsciousness of man.
Right. Okay. So meanwhile, you are now in some way helping others based on your experience and based on healing yourself. I expect you don't feel you're entirely healed, because
I think it's a lifetime. I think that I'm not shy to really speak on what the issue was, but recently we've had Michael Jackson case brought to light,
yes.
and that to me is very healing for the world. That taking place at this time, because it's happening all over the world in households and churches, and it's messy, and it's the unconscious now is coming up to be healed.
Yes.
And this again is what Jung would speak of, the collective unconscious, and why these things are happening and the depths.
How would you define healed then?
Healed.
In terms of the Michael Jackson information.
Okay. I think I would say that the healing is that when something comes to light, it can change the behavior of all of us, and that we begin then to treat each other in a different way, and that when we do that, we eliminate the reoccurrence. We can't eliminate in totality these occurrences, but the more it comes to light and the less shame there is in the world, the more people begin to heal that wound, and it's through talking about it. It's not
we integrate, as you say,
and we change. So I think we're at the leading edge of something huge at the moment, and it's not about who did what to whom and when. It's about we can go back. Some of my understanding with the evolutionary astrology, the matriarchy, the patriarchy, are evolving, and
we see this also with this Roman Catholic cardinal that just got sent to jail for abuse, and he was number 3 in the Catholic Church, and of course we've had lots of abuse scandals in the Catholic Church, and one of the observations I'm now making is with Jordan Peterson, who has been selling the rules of life. Well, the Catholic priests have rules, plenty of rules, but the other side of that is the emotion, the person, the life that's actually there. And so you can make all the rules you want, but that doesn't change instinct. And so you have to
well, I would say
instinct its due.
Having the complex response, complex PTSR, I would say, response. It means that it's and the triggers and the removing of anything that's propping it up. Like for me, it was a bottle of wine. When we remove that, if we put pills on top of it, we're still anxiety pills, we're pushing it down again. We're not allowing ourselves to feel fully. And that again goes to the shadow with Carl Jung talking about, looking at our shadow. If we're on a dose of something, it's like, what are we going to see? We're not seeing what we're really feeling. So I think that the belief systems of, for instance, like the word forgiveness, is quite harmful to humanity, in the sense that without processing something, if I make sense here, when something's fully processed, there is nothing to forgive.
Yeah, well, obviously there's a serious issue when there's child abuse, because Edward Edinger talks about the fact that when you have a child, the child needs to believe that it's good. The child, whoever the child is, they need to believe that they're good. And if they don't, you actually crush that personality. And then it takes a long time to recover that personality. And so obviously at a time when you have abuse from parents, then then how do you, you're supposed to get,
Reconcile. How do you
yeah,
reconcile it?
right. You're supposed to get encouragement from your parents because they're launching you out into the world, and they should be launching you in the best way possible. But when they themselves have trauma and then they're passing it on to their children, we have a lot of broken people in the world, obviously.
We do, and so the thing is, the ultimate is that it goes beyond blame. It's not about blame anymore. It's all of us looking at it and
Right.
becoming conscious. And I guess we come in with a particular understanding or consciousness, and how that works. It's a very interesting thing that it can be seen in a chart. I see it in charts, but also we can only understand another's consciousness by having a conversation.
Surely.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's true.
And then there are people who are highly conscious or would appear to be, who are doing that also, as in the Catholic Church, or
Right.
so it's not it's not a matter of consciousness. It's something deeper in society that's
Right.
taking place. So Jung's work, really, I think the first book I read was, you might need to, I can see it, but I can't read it up there, The Soul, the book on the soul, I don't want to jump up and grab the book, but I can't see the title. Man's Soul.
Modern man's search for a soul, or something.
Oh
like
yeah,
that.
and I think that's what we all need to be doing, is looking for the soul in us to see
Right.
what needs to be integrated. And
Surely.
we're not. Well, I think we're more than we know, and I know that. I did see the interview with Jung with the BBC, the snip where he says he just, it's not a belief. I know.
Yes, absolutely.
So I know that I have a soul.
Right.
It's not a belief.
Right. And for that, though, you need a religious experience of some sort. And I don't mean by that a religious experience in the context of a creed per se, what be it Judaism or Catholicism or whatever. You need to have some aha moment that there's something bigger than yourself that will hold you together. And this interview is sort of a example of that, because in terms of you and me, we were isolated from one another with the Atlantic Ocean in between us, but now we can interact and learn from one another.
Absolutely, and the synchronicity of timings and how things come about.
So tell me, well, first of all, tell me what you're doing with people who you're helping with astrology and or PTSD.
Well, I think I started looking at the complex PTSD I was fascinated that I realized that when I could say I'm having a flashback, because prior I just thought that I was, I would ask myself, what's wrong with me? I would have feelings and I didn't understand. And now I can say, I know when I have a flashback, or I know when I'm being triggered. So I think that with people, educating people on that matter, I did speak with Pete Walker, who wrote The Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving. Took 2 hours with him, 1 hour at one point last year, and then another hour. He's in San Francisco, and I felt very blessed to have that 2 hours with him, because he did say that the whole thing is in the system of, doctors and going to get help and psychological help. We have the issue that if people don't have the relational skills, then to understand how another person is experiencing something or feeling.
Right.
For instance, if one could go and see somebody and the answer could be you have to forgive, or you need to do some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But I find that people need to be very aware that there is a grieving process, there's healthy angering. And the grieving and the angering, it's something in society that people don't want to hear, or they don't want to see that part of the humanness of us all. Right. You know, I think that people, when you said you were in, I might be wrong, Vietnam, you said you...
Yes.
And that you had some PTSD. I don't think these memories just, you know, disappear and go away. They're not something we just let go of.
Right.
They define you.
I'll just give an explanation of what mine were so that you can work with these ideas. But I left Vietnam after 9 months. I left with the 1st Marine Division as we left Vietnam. I literally checked out of the 1st Marine Division in Vietnam and checked into the 1st Marine Division in California because we moved the flag overnight while I was flying. and so I was literally one of the last guys out. And so I thought I had had a fairly mild experience in Vietnam as compared to other U.S. Marines, and I didn't think I was having any problem with it. And I left on April the 12th, 1971. And so that 4th of July, I never had any thoughts about it after that for the next 3 months. And anyway, I was still a active duty Marine officer. I was training Marines, but for the 4th of July weekend, I went to visit my father-in-law, and he had a boat, and he wanted to go out on the Niagara River above the Niagara Falls to watch the fireworks on the 4th of July. So I'm in this boat, and you know, everything's fine. We're having a nice evening together as family. And when the fireworks started, oh my God, I immediately wanted to jump out of the boat. I almost jumped out of the boat. It just hit me so hard. And ever since then, every time we have fireworks, you know, I can watch it on television, but I can't really watch it live anymore.
What about hearing them, if you hear them?
Well, it's both hearing and smelling the cordite of the explosive that triggers it. And then the other thing that gets me, I happen to live in the town where the U.S. Naval Academy is located. And so we have a lot of helicopters going by. And so every time a helicopter goes by, that does it too. And you know, I'm right back in Vietnam when I hear a helicopter go by.
It's fascinating to hear as well, and I think this is, you know, I think we can't just switch that off.
Right, and I never have been able to switch it off, and I left Vietnam, 60 years ago, almost 50 years ago, I guess.
Wow.
And so, but. And I never had a diagnosis of PTSD. I just started to hear about PTSD. And as I say, it's very mild because it's only those 2 things that set me off. But it really makes me know why dear old dad never talks about the war, right? Because dear old dad went through some traumatic things in the war, almost certainly. Most of us that serve do have such experiences, and then you don't want to relive it, and so you cut that area off in your life. In the case of my father-in-law, who served during World War II, he could never talk about it to his wife and his daughter, my wife. You know, but when I came around, and he knew I was a retired Marine, boy, then he could talk about it, because then he knew that I could understand what it was to him.
That's interesting. And I think this is what's happening in the community of where there's been abuse, and the numbers are statistically 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys. So that, you know, if we take 8 billion people on planet Earth, we have a huge issue that needs to be dealt with. And again, even to the point of wars that you're saying, you know, we can't fix the world, but, you know, the thinking behind it and the unconsciousness of not man, but mankind.
Right.
You know, and you know, what is our trajectory as human beings? And I think when I look at Jung's work and the beauty there, that there's, you know, this work needs to be out there, and that and I'm glad that it's out there, that people are, it's being relived, it's almost being pulled up. But that's what I liked about Jordan Peterson, that he put his lectures up speaking of him, because there's going to be huge amounts of young men that are mainly his followers, a lot of women as well, that will pick up on that. Yourself with your channel is beautiful with the content you've got. I listened to the Red Book the other night that you mentioned, not the Red Book, but the Red Book for Our Time.
Oh, yes.
I learned a lot from that. And the other thing, that we're at a time where I think YouTube was created in 2005. I could be wrong.
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
But the world is expanding, and also this jumping around, but comes back to astrology with Aquarius and the archetype there of the expansion, and Aquarius, the electrical system of the body. Yes. And so how it all fits together and how important the archetypes are, and that when we can tell stories and understand the archetypes, then we can grow as human beings, instead of being, I think the world's become quite shallow in many ways as a result of media, but the other beautiful end of it is that it's causing an expansion of knowledge which people would not have access to. So, double-edged sword.
Right, and at the beginning of that book, the Jung's Red Book for Our Time, is this essay by Thomas Arst, which is so powerful, but I used as a thumbnail on that essay, Our Age is Seeking a New Spring of Life. I found one and drank of it, and the water tasted good.
Well, that's beautiful.
Yeah, he begins his essay with that. This is the book.
Okay.
Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. The first sentence is, a specter haunts our world today. Its name is angst. Okay, so what he's saying is we all are worried. We're waiting for something terrible to happen. And it's hard to live your life when you're constantly...
On the edge. On the edge.
On the edge, constantly expecting something. And, you know, in Vietnam, I didn't realize that I was that tense, but obviously I thought about the possibility that a rocket could land on my head any minute of that period that I was there. And so that's angst, and I certainly had angst when I was there. So, but because I now have sort of self-healed on my PTSD, now at least I know what triggers it, the helicopter and the fireworks.
Yeah.
And you know, the fireworks I can just avoid, and the helicopters I can't avoid, but then I can say to myself, oh, okay, that's then.
And that's it, and that's the important thing, that people taking it away from being a disorder to saying, I'm having a flashback, or that triggers me. And then knowing that we have the right, I think, when I say we, I mean the people that have been through abuse through parents. It's okay to, you know, not being forced into the idea, which is the consensus reality, which says that, or the religious belief that, you know, honor thy mother and father, as an example, can be very dangerous. Alice Miller has written on this. She writes on childhood trauma, and she mentioned that idea that you have a percentage of society that's, you know, in consensus reality, that believe that it's forgiveness, it's the simple thing, And then you've got where people are reliving it and their anxiety and waiting for something to happen. I see myself do it. I do it with sleep. I've got a very specific way that I get myself to go to bed. You know, I'm not, it's not straightforward. I wouldn't call it, you know, it's not comfortable for me, but I know, in knowing what's going on and what's happening, you know, it's like OCD tendencies where you're checking doors or you're looking at things when you don't need to do that.
Right.
There's safety, but there's a feeling of that angst of something's going to happen.
Right.
Deep in the subconscious.
Right. Well, that's probably a reaction that kept our ancestors alive, because
Yes.
all of us are descended from single cell organisms 3.5 billion years ago, all of whom reproduce successfully down to us. And so
we're wired.
Yeah, so we're wired to be defensive. And, you know, I'm sure our anthropoid ancestors back in the trees, the mothers were very careful to make sure their babies were safely in the branches before they went to sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. Something wonderful, I thought, I don't know if I'm correct in that book, Liz Green, there's a lady called Liz Green.
Yes, right.
She is an astrologer.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So that was interesting that reference came up as well. And I'm seeing that, looking how healed I've become through evolutionary astrology. And it pleased I don't know how true this is, you might need to put me right on this, but I did read that Jung did look at charts of couples.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know how true that is.
No, he certainly did. He certainly did. And, you know, we have to understand what these things are, and I hope I don't step on your astrology toes.
So I'm open to hearing.
But the idea is that by synchronicity, when we say something in a divination procedure, whether it's astrology or tarot or reading tea leaves or coffee grounds or whatever it is, but anytime we have a conversation, even now, okay, even this conversation right now, when I say something, it naturally connects to some things in your unconscious.
Yes.
Okay, and that also happens with astrology, very definitely, and also with Chinese astrology, and so if it hits something, you know, I call it a hook in your unconscious, that is something that your unconscious is dealing with, that you're not consciously aware of, but something your unconscious is dealing with, then it connects, and then that may cause you to respond. That's what a conversation is, okay? And as you say, you can get off on a tangent. Well, we all can get off on tangents. And so when Liz Green or you are doing astrology, that's what you're doing. You're saying things, but some things connect. And it's like Carl Sagan could never understand why there were 3,000 columns in newspapers about astrology, but none on astronomy.
Okay.
And the point is that everybody that reads the astrology column is going to have a hit sometimes.
My understanding is I don't read any of those. I'm more looking at the unconscious. So it leads to Jung and his work. Right. And I think that, you know, there is what are we looking for? So the idea is, what is the intention of something? And
well, that's right.
The intention of, you know, I think that believing I have a soul, my intention is I don't want to come back.
Yeah, well,
what can I do now to
What can we do now to keep this conversation going for the next 5 hours? Whatever it is.
Whatever it is.
If we're enjoying it, or to keep the psychotherapy session going, or the conversation with a girlfriend over tea, or whatever it is.
Exactly. But the healing, so I think the healing of each of us, and it really is in conversation, it happens in those moments. And right. Even when I've read Jung, and an example would be that for the last few years I go to sleep and I get in my third eye, I get like a deep purple, and then like some gold or yellow goes there, and then I start seeing eyes, like eye to eye. Mm-hmm. And when it started happening, I thought some of them were really scary. They were not nice. And then I would wake up and see over one side of a white wall, I would see the wall covered in geometry. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, am I awake or am I asleep, or what is going on? So it's interesting that we're holding these things in the mind. And this is the other thing with healing or the complex PTSD response. We're all having these experiences. So there's no separation between sleep and being awake. Right now I'm talking to you. Right. But I could be having this experience and I'm talking to you and be asleep, but it would be just as real.
Sure.
To me.
And interestingly, I don't know if you've heard about this book, but Peter Kingsley has written a 2-volume book called Catafalque by Peter Kingsley.
Okay, I've never seen it, but...
Carl Jung and the End of Humanity.
Okay, it's coming.
And Peter Kingsley it's a 2-volume book, and it costs $75 on Amazon, so that's a bomb.
Can I ask you about Peter Kingsley briefly?
Sure.
I don't know, I haven't heard his name, so what's his...
Well, he's mainly an antiquarian. He mainly has spent his life and career studying ancient Greece, for example. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things, just a minute here, Liz Green's tarot deck?
No, I'm not actually. Okay, but I have been, her name's come up quite a few times. I've read some of her articles on, there is a site called astro.com where there's quite a lot of her stuff on that site.
Okay, that's why I stood up here.
Okay.
Because this is the Mythic Tarot.
Okay, Liz Green. Okay.
By Juliet Sharman Burke and Liz Green.
Okay.
And it's all based on mainly Greek myth, I think.
I love Greek mythology as well.
But it has this tarot deck. Has this lovely book in it, the Mythic Tarot, the New Mythic Tarot.
Okay.
And it's quite long. It's 250 pages long.
Okay.
And written by Liz Green. And then you can get this tarot deck with it.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
I might look at that. I will look at your videos. You have the selection playlist on the...
Right. There's 18 videos there that will teach you how to read the tarot if you want.
It's something I will look at as well.
Yeah. So anyway, this is interesting, and I just revealed not only to you but to myself that I still haven't looked at her card deck, but I have a collection of tarot decks because I became an ace tarot reader about 20 years ago, and wow. I don't do it as a profession, but I could do, and my reading group insisted that I teach them how to read the tarot, so I did. I make this boast that I could go into an auditorium with 1,000 people, throw the cards across the floor, and do a reading directly off the floor with no layout. Traditionally, you lay the cards out in a certain pattern. But I know that if I just throw the cards across the floor and then just walk around and do a reading randomly, every person in the room will think I read for them.
Yes, and that's fascinating with if I've seen it, which I will be honest, like if, if people don't give you the right time of birth with the chart, because the birth time is so important to be able to know what houses the planets fall into, that people can think they're reading to being another way than they actually are. They say, yes, that's me. And then I've had it where people say, well, what is your birth time? Have you double checked it? Oh, you got it wrong. So it's quite interesting, as you say, that everybody would think it was for them. So I think the important thing is not to, there's a message for all of us in our communication.
Surely. And so it is healing. The conversation and having relationships with others is healing. So this is the other Peter Kingsley book that I happen to have right here, In the Dark Places of Wisdom.
Okay.
And the significance of this book is that basically what he's saying is that the early Greeks and Romans were basically doing psychotherapy in their temples at least 500 years before Christ.
Wow.
And he proves it through, some prodigious scholarship there. Basically what he's saying, you were talking about how you go to sleep and you're in this state that isn't unconscious, but it also isn't awake. And Kingsley calls that state incubation. And he points out in this book, In the Dark Places of Wisdom, that the ancient temples, even going to Ephesus, Turkey, that have fallen into disrepair, but also in Greece and in southern Italy, especially a town called Velia, Velia. Those places had basically places you could lie down, and then the priest would put you into this incubation state, which is actually a kind of, it's not meditation per se, but it's basically the state you just described, the state of having the vaulted color, let's say, and then seeing what comes into that space. And that's a healing process, and it's how we can heal ourselves. And what Kingsley is saying in this other book, Catafalque, is that basically, that was about natural healing based on instinct, right? And what he says is saying, which I have no reason to dispute him, is that Plato and Aristotle tried to put that idea out of people's heads by using rationality. And so they introduced rationality into the West, and that's driven the way Western people think ever since. And so the problem with that is that you get too much on the rational side, and you don't even think about instinct. You basically suppress instinct, which is what the church did. Okay, and so the church, by celibacy, suppressed instinct of its
fascinating
priests, suppressed instinct of its priests, and what happens is it comes back and bites you.
And then it brings in the guilt and shame, because if you are not allowed to have your natural instinct and desires, then it would mean that you're going to go about it in a way that nobody can see.
Right.
And it's, you're going to hide it.
Right.
And that's going to cause a lot of guilt and shame and sickness.
Right. And so there's a favorite quote of mine of Jung's, which is, too much of the animal distorts civilized man, too much civilization makes sick animals. And
absolutely.
And we see that in the crisis with the priests in the Roman Catholic Church, because they're sick animals. Basically, they haven't been able to, follow their sexual instinct, and therefore it becomes evil, basically.
I wonder if this, I did read, like, I'm not well up on this, I'll say well up, but in matriarchy that I read, and that it was believed that when a baby was born, it was a gift. They didn't know at that time that conception was something that happened through a male-female connection.
Right.
So it was a gift, and then the sexuality was taught as a young age, and it was a whole different setup. So maybe, living in hope that all of this repression, by being open and speaking about these things, it allows people to think differently, allows something else into the conscious, which then means it allows changes to take place. Because to me, it's not, it's not so much the abuse, but it's like, why is it so widespread? How do we shift this so the children coming in, I'm not here to save the world, but the children coming in and,
won't have as much trouble with it, surely.
And even with wars, I mean, the reality of the chaos of what one man can create is it's incredible.
Civilization did come about by rationality and logos, logic, because we could talk to one another and say, oh, well, why don't we build a barricade around our village or something as a protection? And that's the way civilization got its start, is by banding together, herding together to defend one another, and that all led to logic. But there was a lot of problems, so then at the time of Moses came more rationality in the form of the Ten Commandments, right?
Okay.
And so there was this period of the law, which was this Jewish innovation. I mean, not only in Judaism, but also in Eastern religions as well, that you would follow specifically this law. That was rationality, and that allowed and the idea of marriage, okay, because before, I mean, if you look at a great ape pride, or not pride, but a group of great apes in a zoo, what you'll see is that the alpha male has all the females grooming him, and all the less strong males are around the periphery not doing anything. And so that started to cause wars. I mean, wars even in chimps, as the woman that did the chimp study, I don't remember her name off.
I think I can picture her in my mind, but I don't remember her name.
Right, but anyway, she discovered how awful these wars were between chimpanzees.
Wow.
And so that was natural instinct, because they were fighting for territory and so on, which is what happens outside your window every day.
And we're no different. We are.
Right. And we're no different. And so when marriage was introduced, that was a way to cut down on the violence in the society and allow people to live together in groups and make bigger groups. So therefore civilization came in. So that was the law. But the problem is, the more that law got built up, the more we built walls, the more the natural solution didn't get introduced. So you get, the rule of celibacy is a terrific example, where, okay, it's well and good that the priests aren't supposed to be having sex, and therefore you can let your wife talk to the priest when she needs to talk to the priest, but nothing will happen.
Was that the reason? I never thought about that. Is that do you think that's one of the reasonings behind it? I don't know what the reason is.
Well, I was told it was different, that that there was a pope who wanted to not have to pay or cover the costs of women after their husbands died. And so he didn't want priests who had wives
Wow.
because then he had to support them. But I think more generally, celibacy came in it because men didn't, were jealous of their wives talking to the priest, except if he's, a total man of God and never does anything sexually. Okay, then maybe that's okay. But if you make a law, celibacy, that he can't have any sexual experience, then it just boils over.
I think so. And I think we're all different constitutions, that maybe I'm saying that wrong, but, I know myself different, females and friends, like different male and female, and some are more highly sexed and some are lower. We're individuals, and
Sure.
the individuation of who we are, and then, choosing somebody that's in alignment with that, instead of thinking, well, I have to get married and I have to have children, and the laws, that we have to be. Like,
Right.
for instance, I'm 50, I've never been married.
Mhm.
No one's ever asked me. Good thing. I'm quite individuated as a result, because I was
Right.
forced into individuation because of my early abuse. It meant that, I came away from family.
Hmm.
I've very much been a loner, but I don't actually feel alone. I like my aloneness.
Sure.
It's
And that's perfectly okay in terms of Jung's personality types. I mean, we develop into being introverted, and I'm introverted too. And my introversion was caused not by abuse, but by the fact that my father was a naval officer, and so we moved every 2 or 3 years throughout my childhood. And so every time that I created a society around me, it was ripped away, and I had to start over again every time.
That's amazing.
And so it always took me, 6 months in a new place to get any friends or develop friendships, and then they'd get better and better, and then we'd move again. That was
Did you maintain any people from the people where you were moving from, or was there a point of just moving on? And
almost no one, but I do have a couple of stories. I went to high school in Japan, and
that's on my bucket list, Japan. I want to see the blossom trees.
well, I spent, well, that'd be good. There must be some sakura in the UK, though. But anyway, in Japan, I lived there a total of 8 years, 2 different times. The first time when I was in high school, and the second time I ran a business there 15 years later. And so the first time I arrived in Japan, and I was going to an American high school, and on the first day, one of my classmates threw a spitball at me and hit me right in the side of the head. And he gave me this big grin, and that was on January the 23rd, 1962. And we've been friends ever since then, and he's my oldest friend that I can point to in the world. And except that we're separated by great distance, unfortunately. He lives in northern British Columbia, and I live here. And, ironically, his father had been a very senior warrant officer in the Navy. He was the staff secretary of the commander of the 7th Fleet. And so he had been in the Navy for 30 years. And of course, Vietnam was coming along. And I joined the Marines. And my friend went to Canada and never came back.
Wow.
And so you would think that he was the liberal and I was the conservative or something like that, but that's not the case at all because, he and I think almost alike, I would say, today, and we're both extremely liberal. And, I just went into the Marines because I knew the way the system worked. So I worked the system to stay alive in that time. And he went to Canada. But we're still close friends. And, I'd love if he would be nearby. And then there's two girlfriends from that time. Not long after the Spitball event, I was involved with one woman who was working with me. Somehow I'd gotten a job in special services, sort of as a babysitter for kids that wanted to learn how to horseback ride. And so there were two of us, one girl and me, and the girl in that wanted me to comes up to me one day about 5 or 6 weeks after I'm in Japan, and she says, "There's a girl that wants to meet you." And I said, "Oh, okay, let's plan a time when we could meet." And she says, "Oh, it has to be today." And and I said, "Why does it have to be today?" And she says, "Well, because she's leaving Japan tomorrow." I said, "This is going to be a short romance." And so then my high school class went to the Winds because we were all from different parts of the United States, and we never saw each other for 30 years. And we finally had a class reunion in 1994 in Colorado, and not that time, but then we started to communicate with one another. And about 10 years later, I get this email from this woman, and I start talking to her, and I said, years ago I had this experience meeting this woman one time, and so this is like 40 years later, and she says, "Yes, I'm that woman."
That's amazing.
Right.
Did she know that you were you? Did she know you were you?
Yes, she did know. And I said, "Boy, amazing." And so anyway, from then, which was, I don't know, about the year 2000 or something like that, we have been interacting on text messaging. And so, I mean, we were text messaging this morning, the three of us, the girl that had been in the horse riding group, and the other girl who it actually was the other babysitter type person. I get what do they call them, counselor, camp counselor, like camp counselors, right? So she had been the other camp counselor, and then when she left, I took her job over. And so the one that I did the job with for a couple of years, and she have been friends all that time. And so then they brought me into this group, so we have horseback riding in common.
You're texting together. You're now even
right, and I haven't been on a horse in 30 years probably, but they're still talking about their horses sometimes, or they're talking about horses. They don't have horses anymore, but anyway, that's a long story. That's a diversion.
It's fascinating.
I'm sorry.
It's nice to hear, though. But it's nice.
It's healing to be able to have that interaction with them, right?
Absolutely, and I think people that are that we resonate with, it's so important to have people that understand. That we can have. For me, where I can have discussions with people who understand what I'm talking about, and it's rare. I think in consensus reality. And where people are asking simple, basic questions. I find it difficult to be in the world. Mm-hmm. I'm in the world, but I do find it difficult to be in the world.
I see. Do you have friends from that time for yourself, from high school level, or?
No, I left school and home at 14 and a half in a very unpleasant way, and I found that, I feel like I've been asleep for, you know, for many, many years. I'm not asleep, sort of asleep, but this is almost like Neptune. It's like my consciousness was not grounded in my body. And it's only when I started looking at my wound that I've begun to form a personality, if that makes sense.
Yes, I believe that. I definitely believe
because
that.
I didn't know who, I was just living out my life, and now I feel through the work of Jung and these beautiful books and astrology, it's like a light's been switched on in me. I'm being pulled into something that I've got no control over. It's just I'm being pulled into this work of and speaking about it. And I think the beauty of social media to be able to share who we are, and then people, it brings people in. Like I commented on a video of yours,
right?
And then you looked at my channel, and here we are. And I've learned a lot from looking at a few of your videos. I've been, and information, and even the books you've just shown me.
And you can have connections and friendships across the world.
That's a beautiful thing. Like I have some of the friends now I have I would almost say, not a cliche, but soul. It's like a soul connection.
Yes.
A couple of people where it feels so good to have a few people that you can really connect with and be who you are.
Sure, that's very valuable, and more power to you. So, are you bringing people in for astrology work or
I think
conversation?
It's been a bit more conversation. I mean, the plan is that to allow people to have a voice through my channel, going live on YouTube, and building up people, people who want to be able to speak. I can bring them on, like you've brought me on here. Right. I've got Zoom, so I can bring people on live, and decent conversations about what we're talking about and healing that wound, and allowing people to get out of the idea of secrecy, or there's anything to be ashamed of, or that we have to be a particular way in order to be accepted in the world, to have our individuation.
Yeah, I worry very much about all the anonymity that has been on social media for the last 30 years. It's not just now, because I've always, except when I have been involved in drama or theatrics, I have always used my own name on social media, and most people don't, it seems.
Yes.
And so I think that has to do with individuation too. I think you've made a good point here that if you're afraid to use your own name, then you're afraid of yourself.
Well, it's authenticity. It's being authentic and in the world. That's right. Knowing that, for me, very importantly, the transparency of being transparent, and that for myself, that I have nothing, and this is my truth, to hide from anybody, anywhere, any place. And that's my own truth. I had one major thing that I was holding on to a few weeks ago, and I got the opportunity to speak truth. And that's been very empowering for me and liberated me. And realizing that, there are no secrets. It's very freeing. You can move through the world, and the soul then is freed up to, for that trajectory of whatever I'm doing here,
right.
The work I'm doing, and be not purity as in a religious sense, but being the innocence of the purity of that, which is the truth of who I am.
Yes. Well, I think that's terrific. I would observe, though, that you started with some of the most difficult of Jungian books. It's interesting. I did an interview a few weeks ago of these two young men who go by the handle of Uber Boyo, but who actually do work in their own name also. And one is Irishman in Dublin, and the other is Englishman in Manchester. And they're amazing. They're very precocious. They're in their 20s, and they have been doing an amazing series on Ion.
Okay.
From the point of view of millennials, and it's quite different from my approach because I tend to be an old stodgy last class of the Victorian age type of guy, but I think that they are, they're bringing new life into what they're talking about Carl Jung, and I think that that's tremendous. But I just observe for you as well as for them that Ion isn't exactly the easiest book to start with.
I think I haven't picked it up yet, but I've flipped through a few pages. But it pleased my heart when I saw the fishes, like
Yeah.
talking about fishes, and and Jesus. I'm not religious, but I do feel an infinity with the people. Forgive me, the archetype of what Jesus stood for, and one of the most beautiful things that say, or I like about one of the things he said was, "Don't throw pearl before swine,"
Hmm.
and that is very empowering for me because it's the opposite to honor thy mother and father from my own perspective of living life, because there's a lot of confusion
Right.
about what is what, where is the boundary, how much how free are we
Hmm. Sure.
in this body, who am I owned, am I owned by somebody else. It was feeling, I don't know where that comes from in me, if one believes in past lives, maybe I have something from there, but it's a beautiful journey, and I'm learning so much through looking at astrology. I don't think it's about prediction on any level, because I don't think things can be predicted, but I think we get the idea of the soul and what am I trying to achieve, and then our consciousness expands for me, when I read this material, you
Yeah.
begin to go to a higher place or realms.
Right. And interestingly, this book is talking about prophecy. And Kingsley makes the observation, which was a light bulb going on for me, that prophecy is not about just guessing what the future is and seeing it. Prophecy is about going back and seeing what has come before.
Cycles.
Right, and then understanding the cycles and what's happening, and oh wow, are we definitely seeing it in American politics these days?
Yeah.
And so, that's an interesting cut.
Well, that can be seen. Something I did, and I know this is. I don't know with Jung's chart with time of birth, but looking at, for instance, Michael Jackson. Not going deeply there, but looking at his chart, I looked today when he was arrested, or the court case in 2004.
Mm-hmm.
The archetypes and where they were playing out in his chart, and where, when he passed, when he left planet Earth, what was going on there. And there just seems to be synchronistic moments of how the planets were communicating to each other at that point in time that would point to the fact that people may not like this, but he came to heal the world. He wrote a song. This is a theory. He wrote a song, Heal the World. And through those acts and the fact that he's not here, so it's irrelevant about blame, but it's about this event. The synchronicity of this event is about is healing the world. That's my view.
Yep, that's
Who knows?
yep, that's how he's healing the world.
Yeah.
by making us talk about these things.
Yeah.
And he was truly the man who fell to earth, right?
Yeah.
And because he was the young, he was 5 years old or something when he started to sing with the Jackson Five. And I actually courted my wife 35 years ago by by creating a tape, an audio tape in those days, an audio tape of various pieces of music that emotionally were connecting me with her, and I used Michael Jackson at age 5 singing "I'll Be There" as one of the songs I remember.
Yeah.
And my wife really started to fall in love with me because of that audio tape that I created. Um, and in fact, I still remember the song that it begins with, which is "You Were on My Mind" from Ian and Sylvia, which begins with the words, "Got up this morning, you were on my mind," and and then went down to the corner and started to drink, right? Because things weren't right in my life at that time, and that's what Ian and Sylvia are singing about in that song.
I'll have a look for that on YouTube afterwards.
Yeah.
But so I think, what is the ultimate? I think for me, it's just as you're putting, this beautiful work out there, and I think for me, it's speaking and just helping people understand we're all traumatized. We've all got wounds. It's all of us, and that as we heal ourselves, then we're passing that on, and the baton that steps forward. Because I think the future could be 1,000 years, 2,000 years. I don't know, but I think the future is not going to be that tragic.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
my belief.
Jung was pointing to 600 years.
600 years of.
Well, 600 years before the creation of basically a new religion, which is based on the individual, on individuation.
That's beautiful. I did hear you say that, and I think that I did look at the statistics. I think there's 1.2 billion, there's 8 billion of us. 1.2 billion follow the Catholic Church. I don't know about the Christians. I can't remember the figures, but then you think, well, there's at least half that are not following any religion of the 8 billion, 1.2 billion. So, it's fascinating. I mean, for me, God is within me. It's not existential. It's not out there, and it's not a punishing thing. It's
right. One thing that you should do, I gave you access to the
library.
Yeah, to the library. So look in there for a book by Edward Edinger called The Ion Lectures. Because the Ion Lectures, and I just want to show you one particular graphic.
What was his date of birth? What was he? I don't, because I've never heard his name. So what's his history?
His name is Edward Edinger. He was born I don't know his birthday, but he was born in 1922.
Okay.
And he died in 1996. And so his name is Edward Edinger, Edinger. And
I watched the video that you told me to watch on him as well.
Right. And he wrote 17 books about Jungian psychology, and particularly as it relates to religion. And he was brought up by a very strict Seventh-day Adventist family, I believe. So he was very turned off by religion in his youth. And then he went to Yale Medical School and became a psychiatrist. And then he got in contact with Esther Harding, who was one of Jung's first generation disciples. And so Esther Harding had been going over to Europe and being with Jung in the summer times, especially from the very early 1920s, maybe even the teens. And so she became, she was basically the one that started Jungian psychology in the United States. And she wrote a book in 1949 called Psychic Energy. But anyway, she and Edinger founded the C.G. Jung Institute and Foundation in New York City. So they were the progenitors. But I want to show you this one graphic that that Edinger. Wait a minute. I didn't. Oh, okay. Are you seeing this graphic?
Yeah, I'm seeing that.
Okay. So in terms of religion, because the point is that the self, which is in the bottom of this image, is the controlling part of our unconscious. Okay, it is our unconscious. And Edinger and Jung call it the God image. Edinger also called it the greater personality. And so we have an ego, and the ego is our conscious mind. And okay, as you see in this graphic, there's a man's ego, a woman's ego, and a neutral ego. So the idea is that the self is the deepest archetype in everybody. Every human being at the deepest level has this driving force. In other words, you can't tell me what's going to happen 2 minutes from now. What you would say or what I would say 2 minutes from now, neither of us can predict it because it comes from the unconscious. Okay, and so it comes from the self. It's if you will, God-given, inshallah. Okay, and so as the Muslims say, if I'm still talking 2 minutes from now, inshallah, if God wills it. Well, the God that human beings are talking about is actually the self. And Jung's point was that we can't tell the difference between the self and the metaphysical God. Okay, human beings can't tell the difference. And so everybody that's an agnostic or an atheist just hasn't understood this point that, you could deny that there's a metaphysical supreme being out there, but nonetheless, you do have a God image in your deep unconscious. That's the deepest archetype in the unconscious. And men and women look out through what in effect is like a contact lens. In the case of men, we look out through our anima. And so I can show you my anima. But anyway, I'll show you my anima in a minute. But the point is, we see the world through this contact lens. And so I don't know, in your case, you may, as a woman, you may look out through the animus, or because your parents were abusive, you could...
Yeah, I can see that there's two, I think, looking at me, I would say that it can be quite a male aspect in me.
Mm-hmm. And so you may have I don't know whether it's anima or animus or both.
Both, I would say both. It's not going to be one, but right. I see where I play with that. What's very interesting you said about in evolutionary astrology, the moon is that lens. The moon is
okay.
Of right. The
same emotion. Idea.
So and that lens is that's the ego, and its mother, it's our security.
Right. So here's my anima, very clearly. Okay, this is my mother at age 18.
Wow.
And I was actually born 2 years after this photo was taken. And I recognize her.
That's a photo.
Yes. And I recognize her as my anima because every time in my life when I meet women, if I see a woman who has long dark hair, like my mother has in this picture, it immediately said, my anima says, that's the woman for you. Okay. And so this is instinct. And so fortunately, like my PTSD, it's an archetype that I happen to know. And I say, hello, Adam. I hear you, but I have a wife.
Exactly, and that's the beauty of being able to objectify. So what I would say is, with again, with Jung's work, and for me, evolutionary astrology, it allowed me to objectify my own life and stop being right in the middle of it and just acting out and reacting and reaction. So now I have something to, and probably the same with the tarot, I would say, that you're talking of, that it gives you a chance to objectify something.
Right. So let me give you a couple of Edinger lectures which I transcribed. I'm going to give you the links to them on the chat here, which you will be able to.
Do I need to write them down now? Because
no. The links are going to be on this chat. Can you see the chat?
Not. I can see the chat, but I can't see. I've just opened the chat.
I haven't given you anything yet, apparently. Wait a minute. I'm waiting. My computer is operating slowly. I do.
Mercury's retrograde. The planet of communication is not doing what it normally does.
Oh, is that right?
Yep, that's right.
Okay.
2 more weeks to go.
All right. Well, hopefully communication will get better. Okay. All right. So there it is. Unfortunately, I gave it to you twice, but
that's
anyway,
okay.
So that's the.
Will this record on? This is recording that.
Yes, and so when I give you the
copy
video, when I send it to you on Dropbox, it'll be a separate Dropbox for just you and me.
Okay.
When I give you that video, you will have this chat with it. It'll be a separate file, but you'll see that you'll be able to look at it. Okay, so I gave you 3 Edinger lectures, which are excellent for putting you right in the midst of Jungian psychology.
Fantastic.
And so the one which is Encounters with a Greater Personality, and unfortunately I give it to you twice there, but anyway, that one is about this self and the God image, which they also call the greater personality, and it's related to that that image that I sent you. And that
I like that image. That's a really beautiful image that you showed me.
And that image is in Edinger's the Ion Lectures. And so that's where you can find it. Okay.
So Edinger in that is referring to the book of.
Right, and well, these 3 are actually going to take you to my transcripts of these Edinger lectures. Okay.
Okay.
And by the way, one of them has a broken link to the video in it, and this is the link to that video. This is an abbreviated one. The original one, which I transcribed, got taken down on YouTube for some reason, but somebody else had gotten the main part of it, And so that's the video. That's the link. That last link is the link to this last thing. But what Edinger is talking about there is that he was asked by Lawrence Yaffe, who was the son of Aniela Yaffe, who wrote Memories, Dreams, Reflections.
I've listened to that on Audible, but I've not read it, but I've listened to it twice.
Oh, good. Okay. So the woman that did the editing of that, her name was Aniela Yaffe, and her son, Lawrence, became a Jungian analyst in Berkeley. And so he was interviewing Edinger for this video, the last one there. And he asked the question, what does what does Jung's work have to do with religion? And it's very interesting to see how he reacts to that, because he's very thoughtful for a moment, and then he says everything, everything. And he says it twice just that way. And then he explains himself and why it is, and why, and really talking about this self as being the source of all religions, okay? And so, and basically what Jung said in his answer to Job, which I read entirely on the YouTube channel, so if you want to listen to it, you could do that. But he says that every religious statement of whatever kind is a statement of the psyche. It's not a statement of the physical world. And that's a pretty profound idea. That's another epiphany that I had, like when I saw the video, and he says, I don't have no need to believe I know. And this is what he knew, basically, that religion isn't about the physical world. So when a religious figure is trying to sell you on the Bible being 100% true, actually it is. But it's mostly true. It may be, to a certain extent, a book of history, but the special events that occur in the Bible, the miracles, are psychic events. And so for example, the virgin birth is a psychic event. It's not a physical event. Okay, and the miracle is
what I'm thinking is that from my feeling, there is no separation from our psychic events and what we consider to be real.
Well, psychic events are real.
Yeah.
and so that's what Jung says.
That's what I'm trying to, so it's like where I go in my mind, I find it very easy. Like I could sit here and I could go out to space and be amongst visualizing out there in this connection. I feel that in me, that I'm out there, like there is no separation.
Well, there is no separation, and that's the significant point, that it is real.
Yeah.
Right? And so, Jung says it explicitly in answer to Job, where he says, what people don't seem to understand or can't get it through their heads is, I believe the psyche is real. And I just did 8 readings over the last week on his one of his last essays, which is 120 pages long, about UFOs. And he talks about UFOs entirely from the point of view of the psyche. And except in the the last one that I did today, where he's talking about supposed actual experiences that people recounted. It's a very interesting essay. I urge you to take a listen.
I did see them pop up in notifications, so that's something I've had my eye on.
take a look, especially at video number 5 in that series. That's a kicker right there, because we're seeing those events, those archetypal events coming up in our politics. And are you familiar with the name Alexandria Ocasio Cortez?
No.
Okay, well, she's a congresswoman who is 29 years old, and last summer she knocked off a 20-year congressman in the Democratic Party, knocked him off in the primary, and then got elected because she's from a Democratic district. And suddenly she's been thrust into the primacy of everything that people are talking about. So last weekend she was at the South by Southwest conference out in the southwest of the U.S. I'm not sure where it was, probably Albuquerque or somewhere. And more people came to hear her speak than any of the presidential candidates.
That's fascinating. I might, you know what I may do? Take her name, and if I can get a birth time, just to see archetypally and the transits, what's going on for her.
Okay,
that would be
well,
fascinating.
You should be able to find it. Let me write her name in the chat here.
Yeah, because it would be without date of birth, but there can be ideas. So that that would be good too, because I learn myself,
Right.
and then I've got something to back up what
Right.
I think and explain to people. So that would be a good one.
So what she represents is an archetype, the Anima Archetype, and she emerges from the collective unconscious, not because of she, the physical girl, is anything different than any other young woman, but because everybody is looking for something. Okay, this is a hook that's in all our psyches. Okay, this is the synchronicity part, where we were all looking for something, and all of a sudden she appears. The GOP, the Republicans, start to attack her immediately, and the Democrats are pushing her up, and she's doing a great job in Congress. She's only been there 2 months so far, and so she's just getting thrust out
Into the limelight.
into the limelight. So now we have a man too, who's this Beto O'Rourke, and he's being thrust up as like the savior. Okay, that's another archetype.
The symbol, yeah.
A symbolic guy, and he's getting thrust up now. And he's being attacked by the GOP because right away they recognize the danger of these two people, because they may not know what an archetype is, but they know what danger is for their point of view. And so they're attacking her, and the effect, and him too. And so the effect is they're pushing both of them up into the limelight and making them more and more important.
Absolutely. And that's how it's interesting how that happens. You know, I've seen it with Jordan Peterson. When people are complaining about him, that actually is pushing him further up into the limelight. So
Absolutely. That's
fascinating.
Remember what Mark Twain said, I don't care what you say about me as long as you spell my name right.
That's a good one, and I have seen that. So I do think so, but that's good. So I've got clearly some reading to do on this.
Yep.
And the Pluto, so the types of Pluto, this looks like a scary book.
Yeah, that does look like a scary book.
But it's all about the subconscious.
But as you're reading Ion now, get yourself a copy or download a copy of the Ion lectures and read them side by side, because that will help you understand.
And you've got that on you sent me in the link, which I can go back to.
Right. So,
okay.
All right. So I will send you this video sometime, or I'll create this Dropbox by tomorrow morning. Because what happens here, as you know, is that Zoom has to crunch this video into a usable form.
Or format, yeah. I get you. When I do my videos, I do the same thing. So
right. Could you put on the chat here anything that you would like to have in terms of people if they wanted to contact you?
I think I think my email is probably the best thing. Let's see.
Okay.
It's asking me to remind me later. So if I chat, so I'll just put my email there, which is the best way. And I'm on Facebook where I write quite openly, speaking whatever truth. So, you know, I can be followed there, but I've put in my email for now.
And you're on, so it's Penelope Ryder at gmail.com.
At Outlook.
At Outlook. Outlook.com, that's right.
Have I spelled that correctly? Penelope Ryder, I'm asking you, Outlook.com. Have I spelled that correctly? Yes, I have. Penelope Ryder at Outlook.com. So anybody, you know, wants to ask any questions for me, and then I can point people to my social media.
Right, and you're living in London.
I'm in London, the United Kingdom.
Right.
I don't know what's united about it at the moment, but
okay. And
I'm in London.
And your YouTube channel is Penelope Ryder, is that correct?
It is. So if people put in my name, I'm just going to come up. Transparency there, as in the name.
When I upload this to YouTube, I will put those contacts in the description.
Okay, that was good, and we'll see where this. Yeah, that was a good conversation.